Hello, welcome to this presentation of the mechanics of buying consumer debt. We'll be focusing on helping you to understand the business model around buying and liquidating consumer debt. My name is Seth. I'm going to be your host for this presentation. I'm managing member of Debt Equity Group. We're advisors to the accounts receivable management industry. And at the end of this presentation, I'll provide you with our contact information, so definitely stand by for that. You can always find it at www.debtequitygroup.com. This presentation is really meant to get at the mechanics of the business for anyone interested in purchasing debt as an investment vehicle or anyone just looking to better understand the business and numbers. I'll be sharing some of those numbers in the presentation, but I want to be very clear that these are meant to help the viewer understand the concept of debt buying. They're not really meant to represent expected returns. Now, if after watching this you have any questions or you need an explanation for a word or a definition, I definitely want to invite you to contact me. I'd be happy to provide more in-depth explanation, and you can find my contact details on our website. Let's start with the definition. Like any debt instrument, home loans, corporate bonds, municipal bonds, what have you, a consumer's debt can be sold or transferred from the issuer to another entity. For our purposes, we're usually talking about delinquent or charged off consumer loans and lines of credit. Examples of this range from credit cards to auto loans, student loans to doctor bills. A debt buyer is merely an entity that purchases these debt obligations from the bank or issuer. They buy them in bulk. We call these files portfolios, or we just call them files. We use both interchangeably. And in our case, we outsource the process of liquidating the receivables, but in many instances, a buyer may deploy an in-house process to monetize these assets. First, I'd like to give you a little background on the industry. Debt buying within the context that we're discussing here grew out of the American savings and loan crisis of the 1980s. After the FDIC assumed the assets of these failing institutions, the S&Ls, they liquidated the assets through auctions to investors and other organizations. Assets here meaning loans, as in savings and loan. This event is effectively what sparked our quasi-boutique industry. Today, the industry is made up of investors, collection agencies, law firms, as well as the vendors who provide software, data, other related services, and so on. When most people think of collections, they think of a collection agency who collects on behalf of a major credit grantor such as Wells Fargo or U.S. Bank. But when we talk about debt buying, we're talking about purchasing those assets. We purchase the rights and assignments to them and thus take ownership of the account. We in no way represent the credit issuer in the way that a collection agency would represent a client on a contingency fee arrangement. So for anyone who has a mortgage, this should sound familiar. After your loan was originated, it was likely sold to another institution and then another institution, maybe a time or two more over the years following that origination. This provides a number of benefits to the issuer. For one, it allows the credit grantor to distance itself from the collection process and maintain a better public image as they continue to market and offer new financial products or extend credit for other products or services. It also allows the issuer to monetize these receivables immediately, keeping with the time value of money concept. Consumer debt has an enduring value. In manufacturing, you have research and development, then you have fabrication, and then you presumably have a sale or hopefully several sales over a period of time. With consumer debt, the revenue stream generally begins within the first month's collection management and then produces cash flows over the next several months or even years. One of the key benefits of this high velocity of cash flow is the buyer's ability to then reinvest net revenues into additional inventory and repeat the process over and over again. Portfolios can be partially liquidated and then sold, partially liquidated again, resold, and so on. You've got to remember that while consumers fall on hard times, they typically recover. After a buyer has realized his or her liquidation targets for a purchase portfolio, it can be resold on the secondary market to bring more value. Only a small portion of the entire portfolio need be liquidated in order to hit the buyer's targets. That's what we're going to talk about next. As you can see in the pie chart here, as much as 45% of the receivables we purchase will never even locate the consumer for. It's a simple fact of modern society. People move, they change their phone numbers, and for various reasons they're difficult to contact. 18% of the ones we can contact will never return a call. They'll never answer their phones or any of the legally required written notices that we send. 10% of the people will have a genuine hardship that makes repayment impossible, and 7% of our file will file for bankruptcy. So you can see that at the bottom of the chart that only about 15% of the accounts purchased are actually collectible during the time that we own them. And that's absolutely okay. A buyer's pricing takes this into account. Projected collections over a particular period are how we determine the price we pay on a file. So following is one example of how a performance projection might look on a $500,000 investment. Keep in mind, there are dozens of ways a buyer could organize this: internal versus external management, rate of reinvestment, chosen debt class, etc. You'll see that as monthly cash flows come in, we quickly turn around and reinvest into more inventory. A specific rate of reinvestment has been applied to these calculations in order to balance ROI with risk. Each deal is structured differently, so a careful discussion of risk aversion should be had in order to meet the objectives of each particular buyer. Also, a specific budget for expenses has been applied to the cost of management. This is separate from the fees paid to collection agencies. Typically, a customized set of expenses and liabilities should be prepared in order to better understand the possible outcomes, but in this case, I just applied a flat percentage. You can also contact DEG for a list of general caveats and warnings applicable to this kind of investment. So for the purpose of this presentation, we're using a portfolio with an aggregate outstanding balance totaling $5 million. As I mentioned earlier, we paid $500,000 to buy the file. With a purchase price of 10 cents on the dollar, we have a file with a face value of $5 million. Here you can see the first month's total gross collections on this file is $98,000. In the second month, it's $146,000, and on down the line, you can see that cash flows are robust at the beginning and then drop off over time. From that, we have to pay the agency fees and internal management expenses. For this example, we've applied a 30% contingency fee for the agencies who will work the file. We've also calculated a flat 10% management budget, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Let's review the figures we've got so far. In order to get the accounts to liquidate, we've outsourced them to an agency. In reality, we'd probably outsource to a couple different agencies depending on the size of our file, but for this, we're just doing one. After the agency takes their fee, we're left with $68,300 at the end of the month. We'll call that gross revenue, and we'll talk in terms of gross and net revenue from here on out, since those are the numbers that most matter for this presentation. You can think of this in the same way you might think of gross versus net income. After management fees, we're left with $61,475 in net revenue. That looks pretty good so far, right? So let's go back and talk about gross revenue for a minute. Here's a chart showing the first year's gross revenue. Look at gross revenue for file number 1. Again, robust in the beginning with a sharp drop-off and dwindling rate of recoveries over time. Remember that month 1's gross revenue became $61,000 after we net out our management costs. We'll call that cost to collect. So what can we do with that $61,000? Well, if we took our $61,000 and went into the market, bought the same kind of file at the same price, our $61,000 would fetch an additional file with a face value of $614,750. That's in addition to the one we bought before month 1, whose face value is $5 million. That's a great idea, but just to present a different option, we're going to take a different path. Here's a cash flow analysis for the first 12 months. We'll go over this in detail, so there's no need to memorize it now. You can see the gross revenue coming in at month 1, management fee being netted out. You can see the net revenue is then $61,000 just as before. Now we have a decision to make here. Distribute the funds to the buyer or investor, or reinvest into more inventory to collect on. In this presentation, we've chosen to reinvest 95% of our net revenue and distribute the other 5%. Keep in mind, all of these figures are movable and can be adjusted to reflect the goals of the specific investors and managers. In this presentation, the 5% is going to go to the investor in order to ebb his or her risk exposure, but it could be used to pay broker fees or whatever is agreed upon between the managers and investors. More importantly, though, we have $58,402 in net revenue to spend on additional inventory of charged-off receivables. If bought at the same rate as the first file, this would get a file with a face value of $584,000. So in month 2, we'd have our agency simultaneously collecting on the first file and beginning work on the second file. You can see that reflected in the figure here. In month 2, there are 2 files being collected on, which yields a total gross revenue of $110,000. You can see that this goes on in the same way month after month for the first year. Each month we add a new file, each file begins with robust results, and subside after a few months. And you can see here how aggregate gross revenue, net revenue, and reinvestment amounts grow each month as a result of the rate of reinvestment. In the first year, we end up with a total gross revenue totaling about $2 million. $1.7 million of that is reinvested into additional inventory, and just about $90,000 is returned to the investor. So year 2 operates in exactly the same way as year 1. We keep growing the portfolio by reinvesting 95% of net revenue. You'll notice that we generate a total gross revenue of $3.6 million, reinvest about $3 million, and we distribute $163,000 to the investor. So we'll go through the next couple years applying the same math. Feel free to pause or slow down the video to take a closer look if you like. At the end of about year 3, we make our investor whole and keep distributing that revenue share every month thereafter. Now in the 5th year, we're going to take a different course. Perhaps there was a change in the tide. Our buyers want to pursue other interests, cash in to some extent, whatever. We're going to stop reinvesting into new inventory entirely, but we're going to leave the owned assets under management. To date, we've spent just shy of $20 million on inventory, so using the same math as before, we've ostensibly purchased assets with a face value of about $200 million. Back to year 5 here. We've amassed a large pool of assets that are now under management. We're going to distribute all net revenue and discontinue purchasing new inventory. Over the course of the first year of doing this, we distribute $5.8 million in revenue share, as well as an additional $16.7 million in total dividends. And as we discussed before, these assets have an enduring value. What you don't see in this projection is that if left alone, this portfolio will continue to generate monthly dividends for another 3 to 5 years, albeit at a rapidly diminishing pace. Alternatively, we could look to sell the entire portfolio and monetize those assets sooner rather than later. We'd be doing this in much the same way that the issuers did when they sold us the accounts in the first place. The options and opportunities are really as vast as the creativity of the managers involved. So that pretty well wraps it up for this presentation. I hope we've provided you with some valuable insights into the mechanics of how debt buying works. If you're interested in learning more, I'd invite you to reach out to us. We're always happy to discuss ideas and opportunities. We can be reached at the office, but I'd also encourage you to leave comments on our YouTube page and follow us on Twitter. You can see all of our contact details here. If you'd like to be notified when we post new presentations, be sure to subscribe to our channel and click on the email me box when you do that. You can also click on the subscribe box you see on your screen right now. Be sure to check out our other videos on our YouTube page, and in the meantime, feel free to check out our new website. That address is going to be coming up. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Seth Hill for Debt Equity Group. Have a great day.